All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 6th annual reading of A Christmas Carol, the 6th year in a row we've done this, and the 6th year in a row we have totally sold out the 2 shows. So thank you so much for supporting New York Public Radio. In case you don't know this, we live stream this. We've got 5 cameras here. People are watching all over the world. It's then archived, and you can watch it at thegreenspace.org or many of our websites after the fact. In addition, we will take the 5 o'clock show that we did earlier and this 7 o'clock show, and we mix it together into a radio show that you're going to hear during the holidays. It airs 7 times on WQXR and WNYC. And for that reason, you are part of the show. We could have done this in a studio. We didn't do it in a studio. We're doing it here because we want you to laugh and cry and applaud really loud. And turn off your cell phones. The other thing that we've determined with this annual event is that you get to see, sometimes for the first time, some of your favorite radio personalities that you listen to on WNYC and WQXR and don't normally get to see what they look like. So allow me to introduce our radio company. One of the longtime voices of WNYC from Soundcheck and New Sounds, John Schaefer. Host of Sideshow and producer of Studio 360, Sean Ramaswaram. I practice that a lot. The morning announcer on WQXR, the one and only Mr. Jeff Spurgeon. News host, reporter, you hear him on All Things Considered on WNYC, Richard Hake. Evening announcer on WQXR, Terrence McKnight. Singer-songwriter, raconteur, man about town, and host of the Naked American Songbook on the Jonathan Channel, Julian Fleischer. Our brand new local host of All Things Considered, Jamie Floyd. Many of the people are here joining us for the first time. One of them joining us here who's not been a part of this in the past, host and executive producer of Science Friday. Ira Flato is with us here. One of our many reporters on WNYC, Jessica Gould. I probably shouldn't say this, but one of my favorite shows, host and managing editor of On the Media, Brooke Gladstone. Midday announcer on WQXR, Annie Bergen. And the second year in a row, 11-year-old 6th grader, please welcome Peyton Lusk. I won't list all of her movies. You all have your favorites, but Body Heat, Romancing the Stone, Pritzi's Honor, the voice of Jessica Rabbit. So many other movies, Martha on Broadway and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, an active supporter of many causes, including being a member of New York Public Radio, our very special guest, Kathleen Turner. Singer, songwriter, composer, satirist, my friend, also 6th year in a row helping us out, joining us, the composer and pianist, John Forster. Back again, a regular with David Bowie and Philip Glass, electroacoustic viola player Martha Mook. And one of my favorite cold phone calls asking, will you do this? He's done it for 6 years in a row. From Prairie Home Companion, sound effects master Fred Newman. The production was directed by yours truly. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Marley was dead. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner.
Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good for anything he chose to put his hand to.
In short, Marley was as dead as a doornail.
Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor and sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley.
Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both.
Scrooge?
Yes.
Marley?
Yes.
It was all the same to him.
Oh, but he was a tight-fisted old hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner.
Hard and sharp as flint from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret, self-contained, and solitary as an oyster.
Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. The door was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who, in a dismal little cell, was copying letters.
Dear sir, I am forced to inform you.
Scrooge
that
had a
as result
very
of
small
deficiencies in
fire,
early
but
payment,
Cratchit's
I
fire was so
90%
very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room.
Bob put it in his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle Scrooge. God save you.
It was Scrooge's nephew coming in.
Bah! Humbug.
Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry?
What right
You're
have
poor enough.
What right have you to be dismal? You're rich enough.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine.
But you don't keep it.
Leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you.
There are many things from which I have derived good, but by which I have not profited, Christmas among the rest. But I have always thought of Christmas as the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of other people as fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that Christmas has done me good and will do me good, and I say God bless it.
Hear, hear, sir. Hear,
Let me hear another sound from you, Bob Cratchit, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go to Parliament.
Don't be angry, Uncle Scrooge. Come. Dine with us tomorrow.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I've made the effort in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word. Cratchit, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They now stood in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. One referred to his list.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night.
Oh, well, then you're Mr. Scrooge?
Apparently. What is your business?
Well, at this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we make some provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time.
Are there no prisons?
There are plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses. Are they still in operation?
They are.
Oh, I was afraid, from what you said, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course.
But under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are raising a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth.
What shall we put you down for?
Nothing.
Ah, you wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
To the prison or the workhouse? Many can't go there.
And many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease this surplus population.
I see.
Good day, Mr. Scrooge.
And a very Merry Christmas.
Humbug! Humbug!
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to Bob Cratchit, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose, Mr. Cratchit.
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. I suppose you must have the whole day. Only be here earlier the next morning.
Oh, I will, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And a very Merry Christmas to you, too, sir.
Humbug.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern and went home. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to Marley, his deceased partner. Nobody lived in the building but him, and the yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands.
Now, there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. Yet, let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Jacob Marley since his mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon.
And then, let any man explain it to me if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but
Marley's face!
Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar.
It looked as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air. And though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless.
That and its livid color made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression.
Marley's face.
As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it became a knocker again.
To say that Scrooge was not deeply startled would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle.
He walked across the hall and up the stairs, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and so Scrooge liked it.
But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that everything was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that.
Nobody in the sitting room. Nobody in the bedroom. Nobody in the lumber room.
A small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel upon the hob.
Nobody under the table. Nobody under the sofa. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet.
And nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall.
He closed the door, and locked himself in. He double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to eat his gruel.
Yum, yum, yum.
As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing.
It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But soon it rang out loudly, and then so did every bell in the house.
This might have lasted half a minute, but it seemed an hour. Then the bells ceased as they had begun, together.
They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in a wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered.
Ghosts in haunted houses are described as dragging chains. Ghosts in haunted houses.
He heard the cellar door fly open with a booming sound. And then he heard the noise again, but much louder on the floors below.
Then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door.
Humbug! It's humbug! I won't believe in humbug!
His color changed, though, when the specter came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes.
Marley's ghost!
The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long, and it was made of, or Scrooge observed it closely,
Cash box, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, heavy purses wrought in steel.
his body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. He was caustic and cold as ever when he addressed his visitor.
Hello. What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
Well, do it then.
The ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me?
I do not.
What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Stop it! Stop it! Ah, mercy, mercy! Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of the worldly mind! Do you believe in me or not?
I do, I must. But tell me, why do spirits walk the earth? Why do you come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide and do good. And if that spirit does not go forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death.
Jacob, you are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it, link by link and yard by yard. Is its pattern strange to you? Would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself?
Aye, but Jacob.
It was full and heavy as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since.
Oh, Jacob. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give, Ebenezer Scrooge. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. Mark me! In life, my spirit never roves beyond the narrow limits of our counting house. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. Yet no regret can make amends for one life's opportunity misused.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence, all were my business. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?
Stop, Jacob. Leave me alone.
Hear me! My time is nearly gone. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Oh, no, thank you. I think I would rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me. No more. But for your own sake, Ebenezer, remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the specter reached it, the window was wide open, and the ghost floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out.
The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in the restless haste, and moaning as they went. And every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever.
Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell, but they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window, and being much in need of repose, whether from the emotion he had undergone or the fatigues of the day, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. Suddenly, the church clock told a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1.
Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by a hand. Scrooge found himself face to face with a strange figure. A figure like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old person viewed through some supernatural medium which gave it the appearance of a child. Its hair was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. The arms were very long and muscular, as if its hold were of uncommon strength.
It wore a tunic of the purest white. Its dress, trimmed with summer flowers, and held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand. From the crown of its head, there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past.
What business brings you here?
Your welfare. Rise and walk with me.
The spirit put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped Scrooge gently by the arm. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that his bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap.
The grasp of the spirit, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted.
Scrooge rose, but finding that the spirit moved towards the window, He clasped his robe in supplication.
I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand upon your heart, there, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfares of a city where shadowy passengers and shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way amid strife and tumult. It was Christmas time at evening, and the streets were lighted up.
We stand before a warehouse door. Scrooge, do you know it?
Know it? I was apprenticed here.
The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Scrooge was conscious of 1,000 odors in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares, long, long forgotten.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek?
It's nothing. Just a pimple. Lead on, spirit. Take me where you will.
They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk.
It's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart. It's old Fezziwig alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and called out in a comfortable, jovial voice.
Ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!
Scrooge's former self, a young man, came in briskly, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkins, to be sure. Oh, bless me, yes. There he is. He was very much my friend, was Dick. Hello, Dick. Hello.
These are but shadows of things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
Oh, my boys, no more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room for dancing.
It was done in a minute. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug, as warm and dry, and as bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night.
In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came all the young men and women employed in the business.
And away they all went. "20 dancing couples at once, half of them round and back again, the other half down the middle and up again." And old Fezziwig clapped his hands.
Well done.
The fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose.
There were more dances, and there was cake, and there was great cold roast, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer.
But the great effect of the evening came when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. There were 24 pair of partners, but if there had been twice as many, the Fezziwigs still would have been a match for them.
When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball ended. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas.
During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self.
Well done, lads. Well done, Mr. Fezziwig.
It was not until now that he remembered the ghost beside him.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude.
Small?
Fezziwig has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
Oh, it isn't that. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our services light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. His power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant, it is impossible to count them up. But the happiness he gives is quite as great as if it costs a fortune.
What is the matter?
Nothing.
Something, I think.
I should like to be able just now to say a word or two to my clerk, Bob Cratchit. That's all.
My time grows short. Come with me.
And again, Scrooge saw himself, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye. He was sitting by the side of a fair young girl in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little to you, Ebenezer, very little. Another idol has displaced me. If it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do as your wife, I have no just cause to grieve.
Why? What idol has displaced you?
A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, profit, engrosses you.
I have grown much wiser, but what then? I am not changed toward you.
Our contract is an old one, and you are changed. When it was made, you were another man.
It's true, I was just a boy. But have I ever sought release from our engagement?
In words, no, never.
In what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, and another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. I release you, Ebenezer. I release you with a full heart for my love of the man you once were. May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
She left him, and they parted forever.
Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
Scrooge was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness. He was also conscious of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Waking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore, Scrooge felt that he had been restored to consciousness for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he wondered which of his curtains this new specter would draw back, he put every curtain aside with his own hands and established a sharp lookout all round the bed.
Now, being prepared for almost anything, Scrooge was not by any means prepared for nothing. Consequently, when the bell struck and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling.
5 minutes. 10 minutes. A quarter of an hour goes by, yet nothing comes.
All this time he lay upon his bed, the core and center of a blaze of ruddy light which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour. At last he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. He got up and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock,
Scrooge, enter!
He obeyed and found his own room had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were hung with living green. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull hearth had never known in Scrooge's time.
Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry.
great joints of meat, long wreaths of sausages,
mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters,
red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes,
and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam.
In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see. He bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in and know me better, man.
Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before this spirit. Though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, Scrooge did not like to meet them.
I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge reverently did so. The spirit was clothed in one simple green robe bordered with white fur, and on its head it wore a holly wreath set here and there with shining icicles.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe and hold it fast.
Scrooge did as he was told, and the room and its contents vanished instantly. And they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. They passed on invisible into the suburbs of the town, straight to the home of Scrooge's clerk, and they entered.
And there was Mrs. Cratchit, dressed up, though poorly, in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6 pence. She laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, the second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while her eldest son, Master Peter Cratchit, plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes.
And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelled a goose and known it for their own. And basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table. Master Peter blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
What has ever got your precious father, then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Why, bless your heart alive, my dear. How late you are. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless ye.
And there's Father coming.
In came Bob, the father, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim! He bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. The 2 young Cratchits caught Tiny Tim and bore him off that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did little Tim behave in church?
Oh, as good as gold. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him because he was crippled, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Little Tim's growing strong and hearty. I know he is.
Back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. And Bob compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and round and put it by the fire to simmer.
Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession.
Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon. And in truth it was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot.
Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor.
Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates.
And Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in the corner at the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody and crammed spoons into their mouths lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came. At last the dishes were set on.
Dear Father. And grace was said.
Amen.
It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the goose. And when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board. And even Tiny Tim beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried,
Hurrah! There never was such a goose. Look at it.
I don't believe there ever was such a goose cooked.
Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish,
Why, we haven't eaten it all. And you two young ones are steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows.
Mrs. Cratchit left the room to take the pudding up and bring it in.
Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out.
Oh, no.
Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose.
A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid.
There was a cloud of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day. That was the cloth over the pudding. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered.
Flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, hard and firm, blazing in ignited brandy and bedecked with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Everybody had something to say about it.
Mrs. Cratchit, I regard this pudding as the greatest success achieved by you since our marriage.
But nobody said or thought that it was at all a small pudding for such a large family.
At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound of the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire.
Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family's display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed...
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. A Merry Christmas. God bless us.
God bless us. Everyone.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race shall find him here. But what then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Man, if man you be in heart, forbear those wicked words until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge. I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children. Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day's, but not for his. All right. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
They were not a handsome family, but they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time.
As this scene vanished, it was with a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize his nephew's voice and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room.
Uncle Scrooge said that Christmas was a humbug. He believes it, too. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I'll have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. He won't come and dine with us? What's the consequence? He doesn't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
Everybody else said the same, and they must have been competent judges because they had just had dinner. With the dessert upon the table, they were clustered round the fire by lamplight.
After a while, they played at forfeits. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge. Wholly forgetting that his voice made no sound in their ears, he sometimes came out with his guests quite loud.
I win! Oh, Spirit, I beg you, let us remain here until the guests depart.
No, we cannot stay.
The whole scene passed off in a breath, and Scrooge and the Spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The Spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich.
In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the Spirit out, the Spirit left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts.
But while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost of Christmas Present grew clearly older.
Tell me this, are spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight. The time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing the 11:03 at that very moment.
Forgive me in what I ask, but I see something strange protruding from the bottom of your robe. Is it a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw, for the lack of flesh there is upon it. Look here.
From the foldings of its robe, the Spirit brought forth 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility.
Where graceful youth should have filled their features out, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out, menacing.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are man's, and they cling to me. This boy is ignorance. This girl is poverty. Beware them both and all of their degree, but most of all, beware this boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Oh, Spirit, I did not mean those words when I said them. I did not mean them.
The bell struck 12. He lifted up his eyes and beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for the very air through which this spirit moved seemed to scatter gloom and mystery.
It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. Mysterious presence filled Scrooge with a solemn dread.
I am in the presence of the goat of Christmas yet to come.
The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit?
The upper portion of its garment was contracted for an instant, as if the spirit had nodded its head. That was the only answer Scrooge received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it.
The spirit paused a moment as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this, to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen. But I know your purpose is to do me good. Lead on, spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city. The city, rather, seemed to spring up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, on the exchange amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the spirit's hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
Oh, when did he die?
Last night, I believe.
I thought he'd never die. What was the matter with him?
God knows.
Well, what has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. All to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Scrooge recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed.
Merciful heavens! What is this?
Now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for,
the body of a man.
The cover of the body was so carefully, so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it would have disclosed the face. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head.
I understand you, spirit, and I would look if I could. But I have not the power. I have not the strength. Spirit, hear me. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death. Or this dark chamber, this horror spirit, will be forever present to me. Take me to a gentler place.
The ghost conducted him to Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before. They found the mother and the children seated round the fire, quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at the eldest, Peter, who had a book before him.
The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but they too were very quiet. The mother laid her sewing upon the table and put her hand up to her face.
This color hurts my eyes.
The color drew her tears? Oh no. Poor Tiny Tim.
My eyes are better now. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't for the world show weak eyes to your father.
Bob came in. He was cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But we'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on... Oh, my little child. My little child. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed Scrooge to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to a gravestone.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that must be? Or are they only shadows of things that may be?
Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and read upon the stone of the neglected grave the name
Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon that bed?
The specter pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, spirit, hear me. Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I have been. Why show me this if I am past all hope? Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, in the present, the future. Yes, the spirits of all three shall thrive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in.
Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised. For this I say, on my knees, oh Jacob, oh, on my knees.
He was so fluttered and so glowing with good intentions that his broken voice could scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears.
The churches were ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head.
Hey, young fellow! Hey, you there! What's today?
Sir, you're calling to me?
What's today, my fine fellow?
Oh, today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day! I haven't missed it! Do you know the poulterer in the next street at the corner?
I should hope I do.
An intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there?
The prize turkey? I think it's hanging there now.
Is it? Well, go and buy it, my lad. Go and buy it. Tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man. I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes. I'll give you half a crown.
I'll be back in 2 minutes.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the calf, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled until he cried.
He dressed himself in all his best and at last got out into the streets. And he looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said,
"Good morning, sir."
And a Merry Christmas to you.
And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. And in the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock.
Why, bless my soul. Who's that?
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. And I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It's a mercy his nephew didn't shake his arm off. In 5 minutes, Scrooge felt at home. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness, wonderful Christmas Day. But
he was early at the office next morning. If he could only be there and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing Scrooge had set his heart upon.
And he did it. The clock struck 9, no Bob. A quarter past, no Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his usual time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in.
Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Mr. Cratchit, what do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. Yes, I am behind my usual time. It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, Mr. Cratchit,
Oh, please, sir. Please.
I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down and calling to the people in the court for help and a straitjacket.
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A Merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary, yes, and endeavor to assist your family. We will discuss your situation this very afternoon over a bowl of Christmas punch. Make up the fire, and for heaven's sakes, buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father.
He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city ever knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him.
Scrooge had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us. Everyone.